Will a deal to end war between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda work this time? They've signed an agreement in Washington to end the long-running conflict in eastern DRC, and it has the full support of the United States. But how will it work in practice, and what are the chances of success? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. So years of fighting between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda may be at an end. Thanks to a peace deal signed in the United States, Rwanda has agreed to remove thousands of troops from eastern Congo that were supporting the Rwandan-backed armed group M23 as it took control of major cities and mining areas. And that was widely seen as a major escalation and stoked fears of a regional conflict with thousands of people being killed and hundreds of thousands displaced. So can this agreement succeed where many others have failed? With at least 100 armed groups operating in eastern DRC, is it possible to disarm them? And is this deal really about US interests in Congolese minerals? We'll put those questions to our guests in a second. But first, Imogen Kimber tells us more.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda have signed a peace deal in the United States to end years of fighting. The hostilities have killed thousands of people and displaced hundreds of thousands of others.
There is a great deal of uncertainty in our region and beyond because many previous agreements have not been implemented, and there is no doubt that the road ahead will not be easy. But with the continued support of the United States and other partners, we believe that a turning point has been reached.
Qatar and the African Union helped mediate the agreement. The deal states Rwandan troops will withdraw from eastern Congo within 90 days. The conflict escalated this year as Rwanda sent thousands of soldiers over the border to support the M23 rebels. The armed group seized two of the largest cities in eastern DRC and took control of mining areas. Eastern DRC has trillions of dollars worth of mineral reserves, including gold, copper, cobalt and lithium. The last two being highly sought after for use in advanced technologies, including batteries and weapons. Yet the country is one of the poorest on earth, with most of its people living in abject poverty.
So we're here today.
The peace agreement is expected to lead to US companies signing deals worth billions of dollars.
We're negotiating a minerals deal with the DRC for critical minerals. Many American companies have shown interest in investing in the DRC, and these we're talking about long-term investments. Same thing with Rwanda.
US companies had mines in DRC, but lost ground to Chinese ones during Barack Obama's presidency. China has since invested heavily in mining in the country. Economic cooperation between Kinshasa and Kigali is also expected to increase. But the foreign minister of DRC says there are many steps ahead of that being realised.
We cannot expect to have long-lasting peace, to have successful economic perspectives if the key issues of territorial integrity, protection of civilians, the return of the legitimate state authority are not addressed. We're focusing first on making sure that we regain full control over our sovereign territory. And then, of course, as anywhere else on earth, business can happen.
With at least 100 armed groups in eastern Congo, and what is described as a security vacuum, putting an end to hostilities may be the most difficult part of the deal. Besides the Rwandan-backed M23, dozens of other armed groups are aligned with Rwanda, and dozens with DRC, and many have their own interests, with some controlling mines. And there are hundreds of thousands of displaced people who need to be resettled, all of which are depending on this peace deal to work. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Okay, let's take this on with our guest from Kigali in Rwanda. It's Gatete Nyiringabo, a political commentator and writer. From Washington, D.C., we have Zainab Usman, who's a senior fellow and director of the Africa program at the Carnegie Endowment and International Peace. And from London is Vava, Tampa, founder and chief analyst of Save the Congo. Thanks to you all. Great to have you with us. Zainab, I'd like to start with you. Let's cut straight to the chase. What chance of this deal working?
Thank you for having me. That is a very good question. As we heard in the video clip you shared earlier, several deals, several agreements have been signed in the past. The enforcement of these agreements has been questionable. The follow-through has been very, very uncertain. And therefore, a good question to ask right now is whether this agreement is going to be different from previous initiatives, what the mechanisms are for enforcement. I think that is really where the rubber is going to hit the road.
OK, let me ask you that, Zainab. But what is the difference, briefly, if you would, between this deal, as you see it, as you read it now, and those that have gone before?
Well, one key difference right now is that this is an agreement that involves three countries: Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and the US as a facilitator. In a sense, other kind of peacekeeping, multilateral, international mechanisms and initiatives are kind of on the sidelines. That they are mentioned, but they are not signatories to the agreement, whether it's the African Union, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's regional organizations. These are mentioned, they are on the sidelines, but they are not really parties and signatories. I think the second difference here is the critical minerals component. We have to remember that the involvement of the US starting in around February can be traced to the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, making a clear appeal back in February for President Trump specifically, but for the US to get involved in brokering this peace.
All right, listen, I'll tell you what, we're going to get into all of this, particularly the minerals aspect shortly, but let me bring in Vava Tampa from Save the Congo in London. So Vava, what's your thinking here? We've seen, as Zainab just said, we've seen attempted peace deals before. They've collapsed. Are you more hopeful this time that as Zainab says, that the rubber can hit the road?
No, thank you for having me. No, I have no hopes at all. There is not much difference between this deal and the dozens of other deals that have been made in the past. And the key difference, and the one key element that could have made a massive difference, is basically impunity. These deals does two things really. It denies Congolese people, it denies Congolese victims and survivors of justice. And simultaneously, it also fuels impunity. Peace begins with justice. We cannot have peace or stability without justice. Every single deal that have been signed in the past, and this is not the first time the US has been involved in a deal in relations to Congo and Rwanda. There has been dozens of historical involvement by the United States, the World Bank, the IMF, the EU, the AU, the SADC, and so on and so forth. The reason all the historical deals have failed, it's because of impunity. The chief perpetrators of this crisis, of the killings we have witnessed in Congo, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda and some of his henchmen in Kigali and Kinshasa, essentially have been able to give, essentially to not to be held accountable, with barely a slap on the wrist. And that's the issue. You cannot deny the victims and the survivors justice and peace, and simultaneously, sort of allow the key perpetrators, Paul Kagame and his entourage, to run free and expect peace to return. Until we have accountability, and what the Congolese people have been calling for, it's the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo to address the culture of impunity. Until we get to that point, we are not going to see any peace.
All right, Gatete, you're in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, of which Paul Kagame is president. What do you say to that?
So, just to clarify a few points, first of all, the deal does not say, nowhere in this deal does it say, I heard in the introductory remarks, people saying that Rwanda agreed to withdraw its army from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. There is nowhere in that deal where that is said. There is no Rwandan army in the Congo. Rwanda does not accept that it has an army in the DRC. The deal says, however, that there will be a removal of FDLR, then Rwanda will remove its defensive mechanisms. That's what the letter and the spirit of the deal says. Nowhere in the deal does it say Rwanda accepted to withdraw its army from the Congo. That's an invention.
So you would say that there's no involvement of Rwandan troops within the M23?
I did not say that. Rwanda does not accept that it has an army in the Congo. I know these allegations have been made, but Rwanda has consistently rejected it. And in this particular deal, it says nowhere that Rwanda accepted to remove its troops from the Congo for the simple reason that Rwanda has never accepted to having troops in the Congo. The deal says Rwanda will lower its defensive mechanisms. Why? Because Rwanda says that it has defensive mechanisms along its border. Sometimes it has offensive mechanisms to protect its security, and this will be done after the FDLR has been eliminated. That is
okay. So if you're saying that your defensive mechanism is part of the M23, you're then saying that the M23 will withdraw at some point, right?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying Rwanda. Rwanda has its own defensive mechanisms that have nothing to do with M23. In fact, this deal does not concern M23. M23 is a Congolese issue that is going to be discussed in Doha, Qatar. This is a deal between Rwanda and the DRC. The M23 is not involved in this deal, and Rwanda's army withdrawal from the DRC is not in this deal for the simple reason that Rwanda does not have an army in the DRC. At least that's what they claim consistently.
Okay, so well, indeed, it's true that there is a separate track between the M23 and the negotiators. So let me just come back to you, Vava, if I can, just for you to respond to that.
I tell you what, this is typical of Kigali. Gatete is one of the spokesperson of Kagame. For them, essentially, what the UN, what Human Rights Watch have said, what Amnesty International have said, what the US, the EU have said, it's not true. They live in a parallel universe. They do not see fact. They cannot differentiate between fact and fiction. The fact is simple. Kigali has currently occupying part of Congo. About 1/4 of Congo is being currently occupied by Kigali. They have killed Rwandan soldiers, are responsible for the killing, the mass raping, mass displacement of Congolese civilians. We have seen evidence, we have seen figures. In fact, one of Kagame's top lieutenant, James Kabarebe, a general in the Rwandan army, has been sanctioned by the US as well as others exactly because of that. In spite of that, you have here Kigali refusing, and this brings us to the point of impunity. Until we address the near total cult of impunity, essentially this continue giving Kagame the freedom to continue to send troops in Congo to kill and rape and loot natural resources and not being held accountable. Until we address that issues, we would continue to go round and round, and Congolese people would continue to pay with their lives. As we are speaking, we have about 6.7 million Congolese people that have been displaced across the country because of President Kagame. He's one of the chief perpetrators of this crisis. We have about 28 million Congolese people facing starvation. Again, one of the chief perpetrators, President Kagame of Rwanda. Of course, Tshisekedi, I'm not saying Tshisekedi is guilt-free. He's also responsible for his mismanagement of the Congolese state. But here we have, in Kagame, a man whom the UN, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and dozens of other international organizations have demonstrated clearly that he's responsible for a lot of killings and violence in Congo. Yet, for reasons unknown to me, he continues to receive support from the US and the UK and other EU countries, and Kagame hasn't still been indicted by the ICC. That's really concerning.
Zainab, there we have it, encapsulated in the first, 7 or 8 minutes of this programme, the polar opposites of opinion about this. And that, just for an impartial observer like me, makes you wonder about the efficacy of this, likely to get absolutely anywhere.
Sure, indeed. This is still a very live issue with different perspectives, very much polarized, as you mentioned. And this is where it is hoped that the role of the U.S. in facilitating a lasting peace agreement might be crucial. But really, the enforcement is going to be key. I suppose also, before we even get to the enforcement, it seems like there are, elements and components of this agreement that are still in dispute. So really a lot is going to depend on, what happens next.
Okay, Vava, I'm just going to come back to you very briefly if I can, because something that Gatete said is important just to pick up. He was talking about, I was asking him about the M23, but he was talking about the FDLR, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, which is very much part of the deal. And DRC is supposed to neutralize the FDLR to stop their operations. Is that going to happen?
Well, yes, there has never been any point, any moment in history in which the Congolese state, whether that be under Joseph Kabila previously 18 years, under Felix Tshisekedi, the two people whom I criticize a lot, there has never been a single point in history in which we, the Congolese people, have refused to jointly take actions against the FDLR. And having said that, I also need to explain that there is absolutely no evidence from any independent source that sort of suggests that the FDLR present any sort of threat to Kigali at all. And third point, which needs to be made here clearly, I want any of the fellow travelers of Kigali to show us any single evidence of M23 and Rwandan Defense Forces who have occupied Congo as we speak, have attacked or killed or ended any sort of occupation of FDLR in any part of Congo. There isn't anything of such. The simple reason is Kigali came into Congo for natural resources to loot and to kill Congolese people, and as well as to occupy Congolese land. When we talk about the M23, there isn't such thing as the M23. What we call the M23 is essentially a section of the Rwandan Defense Force. If you go back in 1998, they were known as RCD Goma. And RCD Goma, your viewers would remember in 2004-2005, after killing so many people, they rebranded themselves. They became CNDP under Laurent Nkunda, who, as we speak, he's in Kigali. He now lives in Kigali with his family, and so forth. And again, has never been held accountable. And Laurent Nkunda and CNDF continue to kill Congolese people. They killed so many Congolese people on the eve of Obama's elections that it angered Obama. That Obama
I need to bring it up to the present. I know there's all these. We do need to discuss all these issues, but it's very difficult within a time frame of 20 or 25 minutes to take all of them on. A big part of this is minerals. Gatete is as much about minerals as about peace, as far as I can see looking at it. Will Rwanda be prepared to give up those concessions it has already acquired within DRC? And how can those who are guarding them and operating them be encouraged to do so? Because that's a crucial part of all this, isn't it?
But are we still discussing the deal, are we? Because I have a feeling everything that is being said here has nothing to do with the deal. The deal does not say, for instance, the accusations of my colleague Vava, I've heard them before. But please, let's remain discussing the content of this peace agreement. The peace agreement there's no single mineral concession that the Rwandan has in DRC, both Rwanda or M23. So that the deal does not say that. We will address Vava's accusations of mass killings on another day. Today, let's address the content of this deal. The deal talks about the presence of the FDLR. The government of the Democratic Republic of Congo has signed, first in Angola, and now in Washington, D.C., that they are committed to fighting FDLR. When a government signs something like this, we will trust them. Now, whether you like it or not, they have signed it. The ink is not even dry on the paper in which they accepted that they work with FDLR and that this time they're going to neutralize them. After M23 captured Goma, we saw FDLR leaders being captured alongside Congolese soldiers and being repatriated in front of cameras, including cameras of Jazeera, being repatriated to Rwanda. Every day we have a center, a rehabilitation center, where we receive FDLR who voluntarily cross the border to Rwanda. Those who don't, it's because they are integrated with the Congolese army. And how do I know this? I know this because the DRC signed in front of the whole world that it will now disengage with FDLR. A second point that is
okay,
important.
All right. Well, that certainly has been signed. So let's see what happens with that. I just want to bring it back to minerals because it is a fundamental part of this, and DRC and the United States are, as you know, Gatete, negotiating a separate minerals track on this. And Zainab, so what's your sense of this? How much is this about peace, and how much for the United States is this about the flow of critical minerals?
For the United States, it is about both. The U.S. got involved on the invitation of President Felix Tshisekedi back in February 2025 when he came to Washington, D.C. and did a couple of interviews, including with Fox News, and made that offer of giving access to Congo's minerals to the U.S. in exchange for support around security. And for the U.S., as you know, it is very reliant on imports of these critical minerals. In fact, the U.S. is between 50 to 100% dependent on 10 of the 50 critical minerals listed by the U.S. Geological Survey. And DRC is a major producer and host of some of these resources. But the second point I want to mention is that for the U.S. too, there's a strong interest in having a functioning, viable, lasting peace agreement that President Trump himself has brokered. And this is because President Trump, during his election campaign, and even after his inauguration back in January, made it very clear that he wants to be seen as someone who ends wars and conflicts, or at least does not start wars and conflicts around the world. So this is going to be a very important feather in his cap if it were to succeed and it becomes a lasting agreement. So I would say that both parts, in a sense, play a role, the critical minerals element and the desire to see President Trump and the U.S. brokering an important and lasting peace between Rwanda and the DRC.
Okay, so Vava, explain something for us, if you would. I'm just wondering how giving U.S. access to minerals on the ground provides greater security for DRC. I'm struggling to see how it encourages the disparate armed groups, and we're not just talking about M23, there's up to 100 other armed groups. How does it encourage them to lay down their arms?
I think that point needs to be rectified. The argument that there is some 100 different militia gangs in Congo, it's a PR campaign which Kigali pushes. I always challenge anyone who says there is 100 militia gangs in Congo to name at least 10. And then if they can only name at least 10, then it's a complete utter lie. There isn't about 100 militia gangs, but to your point, critically, for Washington here, the key element is to have access to critical natural resources, some of which are in that part of the world, which is now currently under the occupation of Kigali and M23. So Washington, the idea that somehow President Trump, I think his intention might have been correct to want to bring peace, but the idea that you can bring about peace by refusing and denying victims both justice and peace, and simultaneously fueling impunity, allowing people responsible for the mass killings of civilian mass displacement to run free with barely a slap on the wrist. That idea, it's scornful. It makes no sense. And I'm shocked that Zainab is advancing that argument. So what we are going to witness, it's quite similarly what we have witnessed before. There was a peace deal before in 2012, your viewers would remember. And Congo and Rwanda went for 10 years, at least without any clash And that's potentially is going to happen for the next 4 years while Trump is in power. Kagame is going to stay around this corner, but it's going to unravel as soon as Trump is out of power, because impunity, which continues to fuel the violence we are witnessing, has not been addressed. Until President Kagame and his henchmen are held accountable, nothing is going to work.
Gatete, you can answer that very briefly if you would, but also I want to allude to this report in December from a UN group of experts on DRC that they found evidence that minerals were being fraudulently exported to Rwanda from the DRC and mixed with Rwandan production. And, that's a fundamental part of any kind of, it may not be immediately part of the peace deal right now, but it's a fundamental part of finding peace in the region. So
I'm going to address the mineral in a minute, because for me...
Okay, very briefly, if you would, on this first point then.
The first point, the second key point in the agreement that has not been addressed in this program is that the DRC commits to create conducive conditions for the return of Congolese refugees. That is another key point in the agreement. What are the conducive conditions? Is to get rid of FDLR. I've been saying FDLR many times, but what is FDLR? Let me tell for the interest of the viewers.
And then we've already been through this. Let's move on. Can we just get back to the minerals? We literally have about 2 minutes left on the program, so you really do need to move on.
Why do you Western media, why are you obsessed with minerals? Let me talk about human beings. I'll speak about minerals in a minute.
Like I said, briefly, if you would.
Yes, I would. FDLR is a group of people who committed the genocide in Rwanda, were defeated, fled to the DRC, found Tutsi Congolese in DRC, started killing them, oppressing them, and displacing them. These Congolese Tutsi refugees have been in Rwanda and Uganda for over 30 years. They are just under 1 million people. The DRC this time has committed to get rid of the genocide perpetrators from Rwanda, from the homes where they displaced these Tutsi Congolese, so that these Tutsi Congolese can return home. This is a key milestone of this agreement. Now that I've said that, let me address the minerals.
Kinshasa you have 25 seconds to do so now.
Yes. Kinshasa is more interested in the minerals than in the people who live on where those minerals are located. They lured the Americans in this agreement, telling them they will give them minerals. But these minerals they want to give them, they sit underground of a land that has its owners. And the owners of this land in Rutshuru, Masisi, and Walikale are Rwandophones, people speaking in Rwanda, but whom the division of Africa made Congolese citizens.
Okay.
They look like me.
Gatete, we have to leave it there. We're running beyond the remit of our show. We'll have to thank you all now. Our guests there in Kigali, we have Gatete Nyiringabo, Zainab Usman, and Vava Tampa. Thank you so much for watching. You can see the program again at any time by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, just go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X, which is at AJ Inside Story. That's our handle. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.